Jim Morrison was sitting backstage at the New Orleans warehouse, finishing a bottle of whiskey. It was his fourth bottle that day. He'd been drinking since noon and couldn't stop. When Ray Manzarek entered the dressing room, he found Morrison half asleep, eyes closed, head leaning against the wall. "Jim, we're going on stage in 10 minutes, Manzarek said. Morrison didn't even open his eyes. "I know, Ray. I'm ready." But he wasn't ready. Morrison had been deteriorating over the past 6 months. The Miami court case had worn him down. Plans to flee to Paris filled his head. Alcohol was no longer a habit, but an addiction. Manzarek looked at Morrison and thought to himself, "Tonight will be a disaster." And he was right. Morrison staggered onto the stage. The crowd cheered, but Morrison seemed oblivious to the applause. He picked up the microphone. There was no stand, never had been. And the first song, Roadhouse Blues, began. Robbie Krieger played the intro riff on guitar. John Densmore kept the beat on drums. Ray Manzarek supported the melody on organ. But Morrison didn't sing the vocals. He just stood there and stared at the crowd, a blank, lost look in his eyes. Krieger glanced at Morrison. "Jim, the vocals." Morrison approached the microphone but sang the wrong words, missed the beat. His voice cracked. The first song was a disaster. The second song was worse. During the third song, Morrison dropped the microphone. It hit the floor, and the thud echoed through the speakers. The crowd fell silent. And then Morrison did something the band members had never seen before. He started crying. If you want to learn what Morrison experienced on stage that night and why this moment marked the end of the Doors, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It was 9:30. The back door of the warehouse opened, and Morrison stumbled inside. 2,000 people were waiting. The crowd was excited. Whistles were blowing. There were shouts of, "Morrison! Morrison!" But Morrison didn't hear them. Backstage, the other band members were ready. Krieger was tuning his guitar. Densmore was checking his drumsticks. Manzarek was testing the organ keys. When Morrison arrived, the three of them turned and looked. Morrison was in terrible shape. His eyes were bloodshot, his gait was unsteady, his breath reeked of alcohol. Manzarek approached. "Jim, are you okay?" Morrison nodded, but his eyes couldn't focus. "I'm fine, Ray. Let's get on stage." Manzarek was about to protest. But what was the point? Every concert had been like this for the past 6 months. Morrison was now uncontrollable. The stage manager arrived. 5 minutes, gentlemen." The band walked toward the stage. Morrison was the last to come out, walking slowly, as if each step required an effort. The lights went down. The crowd screamed. The drums were set up on stage. The organ was in place. Krieger's guitar was hanging. Morrison approached the microphone. There was no microphone stand because Morrison never used one. He wanted to move freely. But that night, Morrison couldn't move. He just stood there, took the microphone in his hand, and waited. The lights came on. Morrison squinted. The light hurt his eyes. The crowd applauded, screamed, shouted, "Jim! Jim! Jim!" Morrison looked at them but couldn't see. Just silhouettes, shadows, a sea of people. Manzarek played the first notes on the organ. Roadhouse Blues was beginning. Krieger started the riff on the guitar. Densmore kept the tempo on the drums. The song started, but Morrison didn't sing. He just stood there. Krieger played the riff again, signaling, "Jim, get into the song." Morrison brought the microphone to his lips and tried to sing, but the words were jumbled. "Yeah, keep your eyes on the road, your hands upon the wheel." Those were the right words. But Morrison said, "Keep your hands on the eyes, the road upon the wheel." It was wrong. The crowd noticed. Some began to laugh. Morrison continued, but each line was worse. His voice cracked. The rhythm faltered. The words became meaningless. Roadhouse Blues was supposed to last 4 minutes. That night it lasted 7, because Morrison kept stopping, forgetting, messing up. Krieger tried to improvise on guitar to fill the gaps. Densmore forced the tempo on the drums. Manzarek tried to support Morrison with organ melodies. But Morrison was lost. At one point, Morrison stopped completely, lowered the microphone, and looked out at the crowd. 10 seconds passed. 20 seconds. 30 seconds. Silence. Only Krieger's guitar was playing, repeating the same riff over and over like a loop. Then Morrison tried to sing again, but no sound came out. His throat was dry. Morrison coughed, tried again, and this time a voice came out, but it was broken. The song finally ended, a distorted, flawed, disastrous ending. The crowd applauded, but the applause was hesitant, forced. Some people were talking anxiously. Is Morrison okay? What happened to him? Is he drunk? The second song was supposed to be Break On Through, the Doors' first hit song, energetic, fast, powerful. But Morrison was listless, slow, weak. Densmore kicked in on the drums, fast tempo, hard hits. Krieger started the riff on the guitar. Manzarek supported with the organ melody. Morrison was supposed to sing, but he didn't. He just held the microphone and swayed. He staggered. He almost fell. Krieger looked on in shock. Was Morrison going to fall? Morrison pulled himself together, found his balance, and tried to sing. You know the day destroys the night. That was the first line. Morrison said, You know the night destroys the day. Wrong. Then Morrison forgot. What was the next line? Morrison brought the microphone to his mouth, but the words didn't come. Only silence. Krieger and Densmore looked at each other. What would they do? Would they stop the song? Manzarek decided. Keep going. He continued playing the organ, so the rhythm wouldn't break. Morrison finally remembered and sang, but it was too late. The song's structure had collapsed. Break On Through normally lasted 2.5 minutes. That night, it lasted 5 minutes because Morrison kept forgetting, stopping, getting lost. At one point, Morrison walked to the edge of the stage, stood there, and turned his back to the crowd. What was he doing? No one knew. Morrison stayed there for 30 seconds, back turned, motionless. The crowd began to whisper. Then Morrison turned, came back to the microphone, and tried to finish the song. But he forgot the ending too. He just repeated the last line over and over. Break on through, break on through, break on through. He got stuck in a loop. Densmore slowed the tempo on the drums, signaling to stop. The song ended. There was no applause, only silence and shock. The crowd was trying to understand what had happened. Was this Morrison? The Lizard King? The shaman? This man was tired, exhausted, broken. The third song would be Riders on the Storm. A slow song, melancholic, deep. Maybe Morrison could sing this one because the tempo was slow, the lyrics sparse. Manzarek played notes on the organ imitating the sound of rain. The song's intro, the iconic sound. Krieger added a soft melody on the guitar. Densmore kept a light, jazzy rhythm on the drums. Morrison took the microphone and waited. The vocal part came. Riders on the Storm. Morrison should have sung, but he didn't. He just stared at the microphone. His hands were shaking. Morrison tried to hold the microphone tightly, but couldn't control it. The microphone slipped from his hand and fell to the floor. The sound of impact. The rebound. A terrible sound came from the speakers. Electrical interference. A high-pitched screech. The crowd covered their ears. Morrison looked down at the fallen microphone. And in that moment, Morrison felt something. Shame. Deep, painful, devastating shame. Morrison crouched down, reaching for the microphone, but as he bent down, he lost his balance and nearly fell face first. Krieger dropped his guitar and ran over, catching Morrison. "Jim, are you okay?" Morrison didn't respond. Krieger helped Morrison to his feet, picked up the microphone from the ground, and handed it to Morrison. Morrison took the microphone, but didn't sing. He just stood there. He looked at the crowd. 2,000 pairs of eyes were staring at him. Waiting. Hoping. Worrying. And what did Morrison see in those eyes? Disappointment. Morrison had always seen admiration in the crowd's eyes, love, excitement. But now there was only disappointment. And Morrison couldn't bear it. Because Morrison himself was a disappointment. To himself, to his band, to his music, to his fans. The Miami court had broken Morrison. 6 months of defending himself in court, being lynched in the media, watching his career disappear. Morrison couldn't take it. He turned to alcohol, and alcohol destroyed Morrison. Morrison brought the microphone to his mouth and spoke. He didn't sing. He spoke. His voice was broken, trembling. "Wait," he said. "Just wait." The crowd fell silent. Manzarek stopped playing the organ. Krieger didn't touch his guitar. Densmore put down his drumsticks. The stage was completely silent. Morrison took a deep breath. Then he spoke. "I'm sorry." 2 words. Simple. But impossible for Morrison to say. Because Morrison never apologized. Morrison challenged, rebelled, fought. But he never apologized. Now Morrison was apologizing. The crowd froze in shock. Morrison continued. I'm not okay today. I haven't been okay for the last 6 months. I apologize to you." Morrison's voice broke. His eyes were filling up. Morrison tried not to cry, but he couldn't help it. The tears came. Morrison was crying on stage, under the spotlights, in front of 2,000 people. Tears streamed down Morrison's cheeks. Morrison didn't wipe them away. He just let them be. The crowd was completely silent. No one moved. Some people stared in shock, their mouths open. Some felt their own eyes welling up. Morrison continued, his voice hoarse. "I'm a disappointment. To you, to me, to the music. I am a disappointment to all of you." Morrison paused, unable to breathe. His throat was constricted. He couldn't speak. He just stood there and cried. Backstage, Manzarek bowed his head, closed his eyes. Krieger leaned on his guitar, unable to hold back his tears. Densmore sat behind the drums, his hands covering his face. A woman in the crowd raised her voice. "We love you, Jim." Another voice. "You're a great artist." More voices. "Don't be sad, Jim. We're with you." But Morrison couldn't hear these voices. He only heard his own failure. Morrison dropped the microphone. It fell to the floor, and that recoil sound came again. Morrison turned and began to leave the stage. He walked, slowly, toward the wings. Manzarek stood up. "Jim, wait." But Morrison didn't stop. He went into the wings and disappeared. 3 musicians remained on stage: Krieger, Densmore, Manzarek, and a silent crowd of 2,000. No one knew what to do. Was the concert over? Would Morrison return? A minute passed. 2 minutes. 3 minutes. Morrison didn't come back. The stage manager came to the microphone and announced, "The concert is over. Please exit safely." The crowd began to move, but slowly, in shock. People looked at each other, whispering. What happened? Is Morrison sick? Is the doors over? Morrison was sitting backstage, his head in his hands, crying. Manzarek, Krieger, and Densmore came in. Morrison didn't lift his head. Manzarek sat down next to Morrison. No one spoke for a while. Then Manzarek spoke. "Jim, what happened?" Morrison didn't answer. Krieger added, "Jim, we're with you. Everything will pass." Morrison finally lifted his head. His eyes were red, his face wet. "No, Robbie, everything won't pass. I'm done. I'm done with the Doors. I'm done with everything." Densmore objected. "Jim, it's just a bad night. Everyone has bad nights." Morrison shook his head. "This isn't just a bad night, John. This is the result of the last 6 months. Miami finished me. The court, the media, everything. I'm not Morrison anymore. I'm just an alcoholic." Manzarek touched Morrison's shoulder. "Jim, you can get treatment. We can get help." Morrison smiled bitterly. "It's too late, Ray. I've gone too far. I can't go back." That night, the Doors returned to their motel rooms, but no one could sleep. Manzarek sat in his room and thought. 9 years. 9 years had passed since he met Morrison in Venice Beach in 1965. Back then, Morrison was a brilliant poet, a visionary artist. When Manzarek first heard the song Moonlight Drive, he knew, this kid is special. Together, they formed the Doors, signed a recording contract within 6 months, and in 1967, Light My Fire hit #1. Everything was perfect. But then Morrison began to change. Alcohol, drugs, scandals. Miami in 1969 began to destroy Morrison. And now, in December 1970, Morrison was completely gone. Manzarek went to Morrison's room early in the morning. He knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again. Still no answer. Manzarek grew worried, tried to open the door. It was locked. He ran to the front desk, got a key, entered the room. Morrison was asleep in bed, empty whiskey bottles beside him. Manzarek relaxed. At least Morrison was alive. In the afternoon, the band gathered. In the hotel lobby, in a quiet corner. Morrison arrived, looking calm but with determination in his eyes. He sat down and said, "I'm leaving the Doors." The 3 musicians were shocked. Manzarek protested. "Jim, don't make a rash decision. Last night was a bad night, but..." Morrison cut him off. "Ray, last night wasn't a bad night. Last night was real. I can't be in the Doors anymore. I'm destroying you. I'm destroying the music. I'm destroying myself." Krieger asked, "What are you going to do, Jim?" Morrison replied, "I'm going to Paris, with Pamela. I'm going to get away from music. Maybe I'll write poetry. Maybe I'll just live." Dinsmore asked quietly, "Will you come back?" Morrison didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, "I don't know, John. I don't know." In December 1970, the Doors didn't officially break up, but they were effectively finished. Morrison went to Paris in March 1971. He and Pamela Corson settled into a small apartment in the Marais district. Morrison grew a beard, gained weight, became unrecognizable. He walked the streets of Paris, sat in cafes, wrote poetry. No one recognized him. Morrison was free. Free from fame, pressure, expectations. But he wasn't happy. Because Morrison couldn't fill the void inside him. The alcohol continued, a bottle a day, sometimes 2. Morrison's health deteriorated, coughing, shortness of breath, chest pain. Pamela insisted, "Jim, go to the doctor." But Morrison refused. "It'll pass, Pam. It's just the flu." On the night of July 3rd, 1971, Morrison went into the bathroom, filled the tub with hot water, and got in. Pamela fell asleep in the living room. When Pamela woke up in the morning, Jim was still in the bathroom. She knocked on the door. No answer. She opened the door. Morrison was in the tub, motionless, dead. 27 years old. When Morrison died, the world was shocked. But 3 people were most shocked: Manzarek, Krieger, Densmore. Because they knew. They could have saved Morrison. After the New Orleans concert, they should have forced Morrison into treatment. gotten him help. But they didn't. They respected Morrison's decision, and now Morrison was dead. Manzarek blamed himself for years. I was Jim's closest friend. I should have saved him. Krieger felt the same. That night in New Orleans, Jim was asking for help. He was crying. We didn't listen to him. Densmore said, Jim apologized, just once. And instead of forgiving him, we should have tried to save him. The New Orleans concert was a turning point in the Doors' history. It was the only time Morrison was vulnerable, showed his true feelings, and asked for help. And that moment also marked the end of the Doors. When Morrison cried on stage that night, he wasn't just crying for himself. He was crying for the Doors, for lost potential, for shattered dreams. And 6 months later, when Morrison died in Paris, those tears still echoed. Because Morrison's last words were spoken in New Orleans, I am a disappointment. But Morrison was wrong. He was not a disappointment. He was a genius, a tragic genius. And that night, Morrison's tears proved it. Because true artists feel, suffer, break. And Morrison did it all. Morrison died in New Orleans. In Paris, only his body went.